Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible battle that lasted over, well, not over, but almost 7 hours from the round 10 of the 2022 Tata Steel Chess Masters. It's Vidit versus Praggnanandhaa, and this game it has so many turnarounds that, I don't know, first I thought I was going to have like a 1 to 2 pause the video moments, then I realized I could have at least 15, then I thought maybe not show all the lines because the video will be an hour long, but I still decided to show a fine portion of the line. So this might be a longer video. If you are not up to it, you are welcome to check it out at any time, as this is a very grueling game. So that being said, let's check it out. A lot at stake here. Praggu not having the greatest tournament so far, but he is the underdog here. So of course, no one is expecting him to win the tournament, but he would definitely enjoy half a point at least, and Vidit is doing incredibly well in the tournament. A full point will propel him straight into second place, tied with Anish Giri, and then he will be, of course, trying to catch up to Magnus Carlsen, as Vidit in the next round plays against Magnus. So we'll see what happens. Vidit with the white pieces opens with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, we have e6, knight to c3, and now bishop to b4. I was already very happy here, as I am a great fan of the Nimzo Indian defense. We have queen to c2. This is the popular choice nowadays. After the bishop captures, you will be able to capture with the queen. We have castles by black, and now a3. We challenge the bishop here. Bishop captures, queen captures, and now striking in the center with d5. Bishop to g5, now attacking the knight, so the knight cannot move. The queen is on d8, and now Praggu goes for the very aggressive c5. Also popular is just d captures on c4, as then after queen captures you get to play b6 kind of with tempo. The bishop can be developed to a6, to b7, all depending on what white plays. So instead, after bishop g5, we have c5 here by Praggu, and now d captures on c5 and d4 now. So Praggu repeats what he already played in this tournament against Richard Rapport. The only difference is Rapport played queen to g3, but here Vidit plays queen to f3, so that's the difference from this one. We have knight b to d7, continuing development, and now e3. Challenging the d4 pawn, and also inviting black to capture here. But Praggu knows his stuff very well. Here, the absolute strongest move by the engine is h6. This is what Praggu plays, so he came very well prepared. And now bishop captures on h6. The problem is any move other than bishop captures on f6 will be insufficient. If you, for example, go bishop to h4, we're going to play e5, and now after, let's say, e captures queenside castles, as white is castling queenside this game. There's g5, and after the bishop moves, knight captures on c5, and black's position is just, even overwhelming. So instead, after h6, we have the bishop captures on f6, forcing black to waste a move on recapturing, knight captures on f6, and now we castle queenside. So now, for the moment, our c5 pawn survives. We have e5, and now knight to e2, putting more pressure on the d4 pawn. And the position is a known one. For example, Magnus Carlsen had this against Levon Aronian in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational last year, and Magnus won that game very nicely. But in that game, Aronian played bishop to g4. But here we have d3, and this is a very, very tricky move. But luckily not for Vidit. Vidit already had this position against Surya Shekhar Ganguly in 2018, and I'm pretty sure both of them know this, so it's interesting to see who prepared it better. So knight to c3 by Vidit, everything the same as he played in his 2018 game. Bishop to g4, now attacking the queen and of course the rook here. So it seems like black already won the game, but there is the tricky rook captures on d3. Now attacking black's queen, so queen to a5, and now comes queen to g3, getting the queen out of harm's way. Queen captures on c5, and now in the game against Ganguly in 2018, Vidit played e4, and he was able to win that game. But here he plays rook to d2, and it's interesting that rook to d2, the engine prefers a little bit more than e4. So Vidit also improved on his game from 2018. Meaning that, of course, he analyzes all of the games, even those that he won, because that's what you have to do if you want to, be at the very top. So here, and like I said, rook to d2 is a new move. So as of move 17, we have a completely new game. So here, bishop back to e6. And now as the pawn here is attacked, how do you defend it? You can't really play b3, d8, 3 pawn falls. So here Vidit finds a very nice move, and that is of course pawn to b4. This is a great move in any position pretty much, so here it works just wonders. And the thing is, where do you move the queen? The e5 pawn is hanging. If you play queen c7 to defend it, then you basically invite knight b5, you cover these squares, queen b8, knight to d6, and next we're going to capture the pawn, so it's really not all that much for black. So instead, after b4, we have the immediate queen to c8. Doesn't matter, white can have the pawn, then we're going to capture on c4, our queen still attacks it. So queen captures on e5, we have bishop captures on c4, and now king to b2. We have a5, Pragu starts an attack against Vidit's king, and now b5. Of course, we do not want to open up the file for Pragu's rook. Bishop captures on f1, rook captures, and now queen to c4. So we use this capture to remaneuver our queen to c4 with tempo. And we want to play a4, queen to b3 check, and this will be, of course, very, very good for black. So here we have rook to c1, getting the rook out of harm's way, and now a4, going for this queen to b3 idea. Not necessarily right away. It's a threat. We don't have to execute it right away, of course. And here we have knight to b1 by Vidit. And the knight here is an incredibly powerful defending piece because it defends everything here, the a3 pawn, the c3 square. However, there was a very interesting way of defending with queen to e7. The idea behind it being that queen to b4 is possible, and then you don't have to worry about it all that much. If queen b3 check, we can move king a1, and now if rook f to e8, let's say, attacks the queen, queen to b4. And once the queen moves, of course, black will not want to trade queens. Black is the one attacking. We can just play king b2, and everything is perfectly fine here. And on the other hand, after queen to e7, you could also start with rook f to c8, so it looks very dangerous. The knight can't move because the rook would hang, but now just queen b4, and again, if queen to e6, then we play rook to d4, and white is doing more than okay here. For example, rook to c7, rook c to d1 now, with the idea of trading off a pair of rooks, and then white will definitely be better. So maybe a line that could have been considered, but okay. Knight to b1 by Vidit, and now queen to b3 with check. King to a1, and it seems like white is really in trouble, but all in all, it's very hard for black to do something about this because the knight is an excellent defender here. So rook a to c8, attacking the rook on c1. Vidit trades once, captures, and now this is the position where both players have some 55 minutes on the clock, and Vidit finds the absolute best move, and that is a queen to f5, going after the rook here, and asking Pragu, what do you play here? So, for example, you could play something like rook to c1, but then you get checkmated. Rook to d8, and the queen covers the h7 square. That's just it. So queen to f5, very important, remaneuvering with tempo, guarding the h7 square. So here, queen to c4, Pragu just guards the rook and now has a nice queen-rook battery on the c-file. And now rook to d4, attacking Pragu's queen. We have queen back to c7. Interestingly, this is a rook to d4 is best for white, but it's also kind of a draw offer. If Pragu plays, for example, queen to c1, then what do you play? As there are some very tricky ideas here. For example, you could play rook captures on a4. You could grab this pawn, but then we play king h8, and this is very important for black. Now we can play knight to g8, and we don't have to worry about getting checkmated. For example, b6, rook to c2 now. Now Pragu can threaten checkmate, and you don't have to worry about any checks because knight to b8. So rook to b4 guarding checkmate, and now we would probably see a draw here. Queen to d1 with the idea of queen to e2 followed by rook to a2 checkmate. So again, rook a4 going after some nice rook to a8 ideas, and now of course we'd see something like queen c1, rook b4, queen to d1, and rook to a4. So a repetition like this one is possible, but also after queen to c1, rook to d1 is possible, just attacking the queen because we want to pick up this rook, and now queen back to c4, we play rook to d4, and we get pretty much the same thing. Rook to c1, queen c1, rook d1, queen c4, and rook to d4. So this is although the best move, it's an instant draw. So here Pragu plays queen to c7. He wants to keep chances alive, and now Vidit has a great opportunity, but it's not an easy move to spot. He has to start with g4, and this will give him just enough time for execution of g4, h4, g5, f4, and he will be able to start pushing. And once that happens, then he can even trade off some material, because he will be very much ahead. For example, if g4, let's say queen to c1 now it's a little bit different. Now we can play rook captures here, but now after king to h8, there's f4. And already those pawns are going after the black king. Rook to c2, we can play rook to a8, check, knight to g8, and now even queen to e5. We guarded this square, and we don't really care. The h2 pawn is free for grabs, of course, but then we play queen to c3, we offer a queen trade, and we enjoy a very nice position. As the b7 pawn is very weak, we can start pushing our passed a pawn, or rather soon to be passed a pawn, and it should be very good for Vidit. But he played g3, sort of a safety move, and also not allowing queen captures on h2. And now Praggu plays b6. We have rook captures on a4 by Vidit, and now comes knight to d7. So Praggu in a very tough situation, but he finds the only moves that keep him in the game. And here we have rook to e4 by Vidit. Rook to d4 is a little bit better, because it doesn't allow Praggu all that much counterplay, as the knight here would be hanging. However, he played rook to e4. Okay, it's the same idea. You have a rook to e8 if black rook ever leaves the back rank, but this allows Praggu this very nasty g6 move, because now you don't have the threat of queen captures on d7. So queen to f4, offering a queen trade, and now queen to c5. And here, what do you play? Well, the b5 pawn is under attack, so you have to play rook to b4. That's one way to do it, or you could try with h4, give up the b5 pawn, play h5, and go for an attack. So those are basically your options. However, Vidit played queen captures on h6, and it seems like, okay, maybe you can play this. We're threatening a lot of stuff here, maybe even just rook h4, followed by queen to h8 checkmate, but this is a most poisonous pawn. So that's going to be a problem for Vidit. Now Praggu plays queen captures on b5, and here a4, as the rook covers the pawn. And now this is one of the moments where I actually wanted to use as a pause the video moment, but then after I've seen the entire game, I just couldn't decide anymore. So this game we are skipping the pause the video moment. Here there is only one good move for Praggu. Or rather one winning move for Praggu, and that is queen to c6. It's very important to play this because it comes with tempo for one. We're attacking the rook here, and also we want to play queen to f6 check. Once this check is delivered, then the white king will not have it easy against the rook, the knight soon coming into the game. It's going to be impossible to defend this. So one thing, for example, let's try queen h4. There are many ways to defend this. For example, queen h4, we guard the f6 square and the rook. Now just knight to c5, and after rook to b4, we have to play something. Now we play b5. This is how we break through, and now it doesn't matter what you play. For example, rook captures on b5, we play rook a8, and there is no defending this. It's all over now. And another thing, after rook to b4, if you don't play b5, you could also play rook to a8 right away, but then the problem is queen to c4, and white is defending. So that's kind of the idea, as you keep an eye on the b5 square, and also you are pinning the knight cannot move. So that's the idea behind queen to h4, but also rook h4 is possible, threatening checkmate, but now just queen to f6 check, and there is no checkmate. Once the rook blocks, you have to do something. We're just going to play rook to c2, and there's not all that much for white to try. If knight a3, rook captures on f2, white is completely busted here. So after queen to c6, we have queen to f4. This is how he defends the rook and the f6 square, and now knight to c5. The only winning move by Praggu, and now rook to c4. Not allowing this knight to move, and already they've burned so much time. Vidit has 11 minutes on the clock, Praggu has 7 minutes on the clock, and Praggu needs to find rook to a8. It's a deadly idea, and we're gonna discuss it a little bit because Praggu missed it. Rook to a8 is incredibly strong, as now you're attacking this a4 pawn 3 times, but you don't really want to capture it. You want to push b5, and then it's all over. So white would have to move the king, so b5 the a-pawn will not be pinned, but we're still gonna just play b5. And after a captures, we're gonna play queen captures on b5, rook to b4, and now this monster fork, knight to d3 check. There's nothing you can do here. After king c3, of course, we're just gonna capture on b4 because our own queen is still hanging, so knight captures, and after queen captures, we're gonna play rook to c8 check, and this is a terrible position for black. For white, white will very soon get checkmated. So after rook to c4, this is completely winning, but Pragu plays rook to d8. As I said, they are very low on the clock, and now we have rook to c2 by Vidit. Again, rook to b4 is the move you have to play because you really have to keep an eye on this b5 pawn, and if rook to a8, then we go into that exact same position where we said that queen to c4 was guarding the position. You don't have b5 and you cannot move the knight. But okay, after rook d8, rook to c2 was played. Here, Vidit wants to play rook a2 and put the rook behind the a pawn, but now Pragu goes queen to h1. And again, rook to a8 is completely crushing here, but it seems that this move somehow eludes Pragu on every opportunity. So queen to h1 was played. This is move 37, and Pragu has less than a minute on the clock. So no wonder that it eluded him for so much, but we could show it. I mean, with 1 minute on the clock, I said that this video might be a little bit longer, but the variations are really something. The idea behind rook to a8 is not an easy one to spot. For example, rook to a2 and now knight to b3 with check. King to b2, and these are the only winning moves. Queen to c1 with check, king captures on b3, queen captures on b1, rook b2, now queen d1 check, king to a3, and okay, now the position is much more winning. Now we strike with b5. Of course, the pawn now cannot capture, so you're going to capture with the rook. Now queen a1 check, king to b3, queen to b1 check, king to c3, and now, of course, rook to c8 with check, king to d2, rook to c2 with check, and now it's game over. King to d3, we're going to play queen d1 check, king to e4, and now rook to c4 check. We pick up the queen, and that's it. King e5. And the rook captures on f4, and you don't even have to worry about the a pawn because we're gonna pick it up. E captures on f4. Now queen a1 check, and that's it. We force the king to another square. Queen captures on a4, and now the position is winning. But there's so much to consider here. It's not an easy move to make with a minute on the clock. But okay, Pragu went queen to h1. You can just pick up the pawns, which is also very good for you, but also you are putting a lot of pressure on that white king on the back rank. So here, queen to b4, going after the b6 pawn, and now just knight captures on a4. Also, the trick is that the queen here guards the a8 square, so rook to a8 should be a problem for white. And it seems that best for white is maybe just to capture this knight and then go for this tricky endgame, captures, and then king to b2. You have a rook and the knight against the queen, so maybe you will be able to hold this. However, Vidit played rook to d2. He offered a rook trade, but now we have rook to c8. And another move where Pragu misses rook to a8. Rook to a8 is again just crushing here because after rook to a2, there's again b5. And you just have no more moves. There's nothing you can do here. It's just a much better position for Pragu because after queen captures, knight to c3 is just deadly. Attacks the rook, the queen, the knight. Okay, the knight is pinned, the knight cannot move, and it doesn't even matter that you can capture the rook with check because after queen captures, now the white king is in check and you lose the queen on the next move. King wherever, knight captures on b5. So this game is just beautiful. But okay, Pragu went rook to c8. For some reason, Pragu just doesn't see rook to a8 on any point. But of course, we have to remember it's only move 39, so Pragu still extremely low on the clock, a few seconds on the clock at best. And here we have queen to e7. So one more move Pragu needs to make. Queen captures on a4 was still an idea here, just giving up the queen for a rook and the knight. But here queen to e7 is played, and now finally on move 40 to reach time control, Pragu plays queen to rook to a8, and now sorry, not rook to a8. If rook to a8 would be pretty terrible. He plays queen to a8, and now he reached time control, and queen to a8 is a problem for Vidit here, because You can't really move the rook away. A rook to d8 would have been pretty serious for white. So queen to a8 is the only way to try for something. If you play this rook to a8 move, since I already mentioned it, then rook to d8 check, and after you capture this, we're going to capture with check, and now after king h7, queen to h4 check, and that's it. King moves and you lose the knight as well. Queen captures on a4, so everything nicely connects, but luckily Pragu played queen to a8, and now we have rook to a2, attacking the knight, and now b5, defending the knight. And now it's just a much better position for Pragu. We have queen to b4 now, but again, queen to h1, asking what do you play here. b5 pawn can never be captured because this knight to c3 move is just too strong. So here, rook to a3 was played, keeping an eye on that c3 square. And now Pragu could try a lot of different things, but he goes just for queen captures on h2. So he grabs a pawn and he says that, okay, Vidit, you've got nothing here. And there really isn't all that much for Vidit here. He plays queen to d2, he guards the f2 pawn. Now comes queen to h5, and now Pragu can play a whole lot of stuff here. He basically just wants to centralize his queen, improve the activity, hopefully grab hold of this diagonal. So Vidit needs to decide whether he wants to prevent this with f4 or something like queen to d4. He plays f4, and now queen to f5, so just slowly improving the position. Queen to d3, here Vidit offers a queen trade, maybe he can hold the endgame, but just queen f6 check, queen to d4, and queen to e7. Again, not allowing this quick transition into an endgame. And now, okay, you could start with queen e5, offer another queen trade, but Pragu would again decline this. So rook to b3 here, but now just rook to a8. Another very nice idea. Finally, rook comes to a8, and now everything is again hanging. There are so many threats here. So rook back to a3, and now comes rook back to d8. Pragu refuses to keep his rook on the a file. Here, I will show it because it's super enjoyable. b4 is just crushing. That's it. If b4 is played, the idea is after rook to a2, we're going to play queen b7, and now b3 is coming. Very nicely played. For example, e4, knight to c3. Completely crushing. Rook captures, queen captures with check, king to b2, now queen to a2 with check, and after king to c1, we're going to play queen captures on b1 check, king to d2, and now queen to d1 check, king to e3, and queen to e2 will be checkmate. So b4, regardless of whether you play white or black, b4 is always the move. So here rook to d8 was played, and now queen to e5, now offering a queen trade. And here Vidit offers Pragu to double his pawns on the e file, and this time Pragu accepts this. You could also prolong with queen to b4, but I guess Pragu was already tired of repeating these queen offers. So queen captures, f captures, and now rook to e8. Now he will go after the pawns here. Rook to b3, going after the b5 pawn. Now rook captures on e5. We have knight to a3, again attacking the pawn, and now knight to c5. Very nicely played by Pragu. Rook captures on b5, and rook captures on a3, offering a knight for this knight. And if you do this, then it's not all that much. For example, captures with check, and yes, you are up one pawn, but you after the king moves, you're going to win another one, and of course this is completely winning. You have 2 pawns, your opponent has 0 pawns. So instead, knight to c4, attacking the rook. We have rook to e1 check, king to b2, and now knight to e4, going after the pawn here. So now g4, this pawn is Vidit's last chance to hold the draw here. Rook to e2 check, king to c1, and now knight to f2, going after the pawn here. We have g5, and now comes king to g7. So now it's a question: how do you win the pawn? Do you have to win the pawn to win the game, or how do you proceed here? Well, it's definitely not simple. Here we have knight to d2. You have to hold the pawn somehow, because black will play something like knight here, rook here, and you're going to pick up the pawn. And interestingly, if you try knight to d6, this doesn't work, because we're going to play rook e6, and the knight doesn't have any good squares. You have to be careful not to land anywhere on this file. Then rook here attacks the knight, and well, that's just game over. So you're going to have to play knight b7, and then knight h3. We go after the pawn, king d2, now rook e4, and after one more move is made, rook to g4, and then we just win this pawn and then the game. So Vidit played a much better move, knight to d2, Now rook to e8 and now king to b2. We have rook to c8, cutting the king off from advancing to the other side of the board, and now rook to d5. Here, knight to d1 check, and now the thing is that Pragg played this perfectly, and it doesn't matter what Vidit plays. For example, if you play king to b3, then we go rook b8 check, and now after king to a3, we play knight to c3. We use the rook as a tempo, and then next move we play knight to b1 check, and we trade off our knights. Rook d7, for example, knight b1 check, captures, and now we've transferred this into a rook and pawn endgame, where the white king is completely cut off, and of course the two pawns will be much stronger. Either you're going to win this pawn, or you're going to at some point play f5, force white to capture en passant, and then you will just advance your pass pawn to victory, because the white king will be completely cut off. So after knight d1, we have king to a3 instead. Also not a problem. Knight to e3, again, it's pretty much the same thing, only without the check. Interestingly, Pragg doesn't play this. Pragg played knight to e3. This also works, but only from a different angle. Now we have rook to d3, attacking the knight. If you try rook to d4 to keep an eye on the c4 square, then we just play knight to c2 and pick up the rook. So instead, rook to d3, now comes knight to c4 with check. The knights get traded off. King b4, knight captures on d2, rook captures, and now rook to c1. And now this is the endgame that Pragg fought for. He has 2 pawns against Vidit's 1 g5 pawn. Can he win this? We have rook to a2. Of course, Vidit will always be able to defend this pawn. So how can you do it? The thing is, for example, rook g1, rook to a5. Now we have to play f5, and after g captures, king captures. This is winning for black, but Pragg decides that this could be much trickier, and that maybe some tricks could exist here. So Pragg says, I'm not even giving you that one pawn. I'm gonna win the g5 pawn, and then I'm gonna just win the endgame straight up. So here, king g8. Pragg does something amazing here. He plays king g8. We have rook to a8 check. King to h7, Vidit repeats rook to a2, and now king to g7. So Pragg performs a triangulation here, giving Vidit a move and asking now, what do you play? And it's not all that simple. If you make a silly king move, then we might play something like rook to g1. If you go up the board with the king, we play rook g1. You can no longer play rook to a5 to defend the pawn. So it's very tricky. So Vidit plays rook to a5, and only now king to f8. We have rook to a7, not allowing Pragg's king to enter the game. Now king to e8. Again, asking white, what do you play here? Again, if you try advancing the king, we just play rook to g1. We attack the pawn. So it's not easy. If you go back with the king, we can deliver a check, and then you can't go to the a file because check picks up the rook. And if you go the other way around, we can even play something like rook b5, and then we go after the pawn this way. So it's not easy to keep an eye on this pawn. Rook to a5. Vidit defends it, says you are not touching this pawn. Now king d7, you can't have everything. Now rook a6, cutting off the king from the 6th rank. Now king e7, we have rook to a2. Now comes king to e6, rook to a5, again guarding this, and now finally rook to f1. Here Pragg is preparing rook to f5, and what can Vidit do about this? Well, not all that much. He plays rook a6 check, king e5, sorry, king to e5, rook to a5 check. Here we have king to f4, and now there is really nothing else you can do here. King to g4 and rook to f5 is coming. King to c3 was played. Now comes king to g4, and it was in this position on move 79 that Vidit resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So an incredible game by both of them. Tough break for Vidit, as he was hoping to win this one and go into, or even a draw would mean a lot to him, because he would then go into next round to face Magnus Carlsen, and with a chance of becoming the leader of the tournament if he maybe wins the game against Magnus. Now it's not going to be as sweet, and tomorrow is a rest day, so also Vidit is going with this tough loss into a rest day. But here you just resign, because whatever you play, a rook to d3, king, rook here, and now the pawn is just lost. It doesn't matter what you do. We're either trading off the rooks, and then the king captures the pawn into a completely winning king and pawn endgame, or if you play something like check, then king captures, again it's completely winning. So really, I have no words for this game. It was so rich and so full of everything, and Vidit completely out-prepared Pragg here, even though Pragg prepared incredibly well. But Pragg just has shown great resilience and great innovation, in facing such difficulties, and he just came out on top. Time trouble was there for both of them. And it just seems that, on that critical move 40, Pragu found that queen to a8 move, which allowed him to continue grinding with some additional time. So I don't forget, here are the standings after round 10. So Magnus is leading the tournament with 7 points out of 10 in sole lead. Giri with 6.5 out of 10. If Vidit joined him, if Vidit won this game, then he would have joined Giri. Then with 6 we have Mamedyarov and Raport. With 5.5 Yesipenko, Karyakin and Vidit. With 5 Fabiano Caruana. With 4.5 Young Krzysztof Duda and Jordan van Forest. With 4 Sam Shankland, Daniel Dubov and Pragu with 3.5, and in last place Niels Grandelius with 3 out of 10. So yeah, that's it for this game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a bit of a longer video. Now I see it's okay already, almost 30 minutes. So sorry about that, but I mean, it's complete madness. And I was very sad to see how many fans that were mad in the chat that maybe Pragu should have let Vidit won because he kind of ruined his tournament. But I think that's a terrible thing to say. This is a huge achievement for young Pragu, and he will cherish these moments for a very long time, I believe. And I don't think it would be okay to manipulate things like that. So yeah, once again, thank you all for staying this long. I would like to thank David Kimura, Thomas Earl, Trevor Furtado Souza, Guen Guok Khan, and William Rose for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this spectacular event until it finishes. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.